And gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome. My name's Lon Risley, host of the Halcyon show. How you doing? Today, you know him as a writer and presenter for TIFO and as a very serious football analyst indeed, but behind the stats and the whimsical jabs at both football and his own rapidly growing presence within the YouTube sphere belies a man with a penchant for the perpetually perplexing, a compulsion towards the confounding, and a devotion to the details, as his career has spanned across multiple genres, platforms and roles, and all skewed towards an understanding and mastery of the inner workings of the topics he covers. So let's dig a little deeper into the man himself. All hail the king of the Goblins, the voice of reason and calm in the Mad Hatter world of TiVo, and an impossibly thoughtful and insightful man. Please welcome Mr Jon Mackenzie is here. Sir!
Hello.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. I'm flattered that you've invited me on, and I'm looking forward to chatting to you.
It's all good, man, and I apologise. We say hello prior to the show, and I'm sure everyone does it. It's always weird when you say hello when everyone's watching. It's like, anyways, I'm excited. This is great. As a fan of TIFO for a long time, it was great to see you join. I've rewatched your first episode, and I've rewatched the new edition, as it were, the transfer edition. The first question I had is, and I apologise for the framing of this question, but I just want to give people a flavour. You were and Joe doesn't help things. You were introduced as, and John's here, and now you're the man. You're the face. You're the guy carrying you're steering the ship. So how do you feel about that? How has that been? How have you digested that?
Yeah, it's funny hearing you say that you watched back the original episode and some of my early videos. I dread to think how bad they are. In fact, I don't need to dread to think that, because I actually ended up watching a video that I did very early on, and I think I'm getting better at the video side of things. Let's just put it that way. But yeah, an incredible change of pace for me, because I've never really worked in YouTube video at all, and so the last year I think has been a real not an uphill struggle, but like a walking up a mountain, and I feel as though I might be getting towards the top now, so I can start maybe enjoying the beautiful vistas a little bit more. So yeah, it's been absolutely great. It's a wonderful job. I'm very, very lucky to do what I do. It's the perfect job for me, I think, in many respects. It allows me to do the sorts of things that I want to do in the sort of level of detail that I want to do them, to the kind of audience that everyone dreams of being able to present to. So yeah, really, really lucky. But looking forward to this season, actually, because I think going into the last season, again, it was so early on. So we did the summer and then went into the season, whereas now I feel as though I've got my feet firmly planted a little bit more. And so it's a case now of thinking, how can we kick the channel on? How can we do bigger and better videos? So yeah, very excited about the new season coming up.
I mean, this is a bit of the behind the scenes question, but you mentioned in it wasn't an interview you did, but you did do a show where you were discussing your sort of role now. One of the things you mentioned is the fact that it's a growing enterprise. It's something that you're looking to expand upon. You're looking to diversify. TIFO's always been great at that, so the pressure's on. So I guess the thing is, without disclosing anything you are currently working on or you can't talk about, are there any aspects of what TIFO is going to be doing under your tutelage and under your stewardship that you're really excited about that's maybe just different from the norm, you would think?
Well, I think the big thing is the podcast, because I'm now nominally in charge of the podcast stream, and it was an incredibly controversial decision by the powers that be that the podcast was going to stop in its current format and was going to change. I'm now nominally in charge of that, and I think it's tough having to do anything like that, where you take a much beloved podcast and you essentially, end it and change it for something very, very different. And I am hyper aware of the fact that a lot of people will see me as an almost lightning rod for any criticism that will happen there, simply by dint of the fact that I'm now sort of running the show. But I think that the podcast itself is the old podcast was great fun. It was a really good time spent with people who I love hanging out with, talking about something I love to talk about. And I've really thoroughly enjoyed the year I spent on the TIFO podcast, RIP. But I think in many respects, it was a huge it took a huge amount of people power to get that podcast out. And in many respects, I think it felt like one of the I know that the tone and the aesthetic was very TIFO, but the idea of an off the weekend show about football was very on TIFO, and I think part of the reason why we've moved the format forward is because we feel as though there is the potential to do. I guess a show with a greater potential audience, covering some of the bigger topics, going a little bit more in depth, right? Which is what TIFO is about. Nominally, it's about digging through the weeds in a lot of subject areas. So it gives us now an hour to have in-depth conversations with really interesting people from around the industry. We've got some really fun guests coming up, especially a post-international break episode, which I will tease at some point, but I'm really excited about that one. The idea is for it to be a sort of talking heads podcast, conversations with people. I think I was talking to Ian McIntosh, who is the head of audio for The Athletic. He's obviously the boss of the boss of the boss all the way up to the top, but in the audio stream. But he was saying that a lot of the things that we do at The Athletic now is all about making things more and more concise. We want to be more and more bite-sized. We want to get people listening. And he said he's really enjoying the new podcast because it gives us a space to actually take time to talk about things. So I think with all that in mind, again, I can understand why a lot of people were so terrified by the possibility of the lack of TIFO football podcast, and all good things must come to an end. But hopefully the product that we're putting out in its place will become another staple, albeit a very different kind of aesthetic, a different kind of format as well. So that's the general thinking behind that, and I think that's, for me, one of the big projects I want to get off the ground properly this year. We've had to rush it a little bit to get everything out before the beginning of the season. I'd been away for 2 weeks, which meant I had to fast forward a few episodes in advance, so we didn't really have a huge amount of wiggle room to be able to, get really like, not that the guests that we got weren't the level that we wanted, but we also did want to get some big names from the industry as well, and we haven't been able to quite do that yet. But from now on, for me, that's what this season will be about. Obviously, in terms of the other stuff, yeah, I mean, like you say, TIFO is really good, and Joe is really good at assessing, the ebb and flow of the media sphere, finding those areas where we can fill a niche, finding ways of being ahead of the curve. And I think that's something that we do all the time. So even in the year that I've been here, the videos that we've put out have changed. I think the way that we've approached putting out videos has changed. We've learned a lot in the last year about how YouTube works, but also how all of these other social media platforms work as well. So we brought in Adam Park, who is just an expert on really understanding, the work of content. And so we're constantly learning. And I think it's not that we sit down and we have these sort of big planning meetings about the future. A lot of the time it is marginal gains and finding new avenues to explore and seeing what works. And that's an incredibly enjoyable process as well. Finding out how to, for me, the content is the most exciting thing, but content is always packaged in a format, right? And the job of everyone at TIFO is to find the right packaging so that people will get to the content. And I find that a really exciting process as well. How do I slick up what I'm doing? A lot of the things that I can do can take a long time to get across. Is there ways that I can improve in my communication? And communication is the key word, right? That's what we're doing. We are essentially an educational football platform, and there's always going to be better ways of communicating, always going to be better ways of educating. And so for me, I'm really thrilled to be able to be involved in that kind of process of finding better ways of talking to people about football in a way that makes them realize, football's pretty fun, even just beyond the face value sitting in front of a TV and just watching as a fan. If you want to understand how it works, there's plenty of ways that you can do that. And we're in a really exciting moment, I think, in football media, because there's so many good outlets out there that are always pushing the envelope.
There's a lot to say there. I think the first thing I want to say is you're right about whenever I'm plugging TIFO, it's usually in the midst of a conversation that someone's having about their team and about a position or a player, and they'll tell me about a pundit that they've listened to, and I've said, can you just do me a favor? Here's a video these guys at TIFO did on the player, and they didn't, and they'll tell you at the beginning, we don't listen to rumors, speculation, we're just interested in giving you our assessment as best we can to the best of our ability, and here's our credentials. You approach football in a way that a lot of people were clambering for years. Now, I think the reason why people gravitated towards Joe's form of mania, shall we say? And I know your pain. He woke up and chose sabotage the day of my interview with Joe, and God bless him for it. But sometimes that personality-driven style content can get in the way of what you're trying to accomplish as, like you say, a channel. And Ian McIntosh, again, another good guest of mine, and a great guy, he listed it. Like, why should people listen? Who is it for? And ultimately, what you're trying to achieve. And so long as you focus on those three things, you will be successful. So it's great that you've got that guiding light in him. But I guess the thing that to ask from all that is, what are you looking forward to bringing to that? Like, obviously, you know, Joe's not around in the same context, although he does still narrate. JJ is just a goddamn fireball of energy and whimsy and all the rest of that sort of jazz. What are you looking forward to bringing?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would jump in and say, just to respond to what you said about personality, sometimes getting in the way of what you're trying to do. I think that is true. I think we attracted with the TIFO Football Podcast a cult audience, right?
100%. Yeah.
For a lot of people, you know, the TIFO Football Podcast was about the interaction between what had happened between previously Seb, Joe, Alex, and JJ as well, and then latterly me coming on. The problem is that a lot of people who are engaged in enjoying that personality-driven aspect is that they don't realize that actually it is a cult following, and a cult followings by definition are minority followings.
Niche, very much so.
Yeah, exactly. So to the people who loved us making that podcast, I'm incredibly thankful, but you have to realize there was a huge amount of people who found it, you know, self-indulgent and not to their taste. So that's by way of sort of explaining what I mean by, you know, the personality sometimes getting in the way of the content itself. In terms of what I bring to proceedings, yeah, I don't know. Like I like to think of myself as someone who is curious about football, and I think that can work in an advantage as well, which is that I'm constantly trying to find new ideas from watching the game, trying to work out what it is that the coaches and the managers, the players are trying to achieve on a football pitch as well. So yeah, I spend a lot of time watching a lot of football and thoroughly enjoy that. That's my favorite part of the job, really. And then having done that, try and think of things that I think are relevant to an audience who might find it fascinating. So I've got a video coming out, I think on Saturday, on the rise of, or the return of long ball football, and that's the sorts of things I love to, sort of almost like big picture stuff, but sort of trying to anticipate tactical trends as they arise. A lot of people will know that I am a out of possession sicko. I love thinking about the out of possession part of the game, and that's really, I think, enabled me to sort of fill my niche as well, because I think instinctively a lot of people just focus on what's happening in possession, and I think at the moment a huge amount of the trends and the ebbs and flows of games are determined by what is happening. I mean, it's an obvious point, right? A team is trying to defend. They are trying to stop the opponent doing something, be it, you know, progressing the ball in certain ways or creating dangerous chances. And what we're seeing more and more, I think, is teams in possession play being conscious of what the out of possession approaches are and trying to find specific weaknesses in them. So again, that's the sort of thing that I think that in particular I add. It is easy to feel like the sort of quietest personality in the room a little bit at TIFO, as you've already mentioned, but yeah, I think. Again, I think we can all have fun, and you know, I like to think I'm as playful as the others, just maybe in a slightly different way.
Well, that's what I want to touch on that very quickly there, because I understand why people might make that judgment. I disagree with that entirely, and the reason I disagree with that entirely is because I've seen you grow into your personality on TIFO as a person who originally, you know, like I say, like with any new job, any new endeavor, any new group of friends, you just, look, I just want to not piss anyone off. I'm going to say a couple of things, chip in where I can. And slowly over time, what I've fallen in love with about your presentation style is that latter part where it's So, John, do you think that Haaland is going to slowly become AI and take over the world? And you'll be like, so anyways, yeah, he plays a left-hand run. You just get back to, and there, even in that response, there was a segue into just a bit of insight into your objectivity about football. So one of the things I really want to get into about yourself, having watched and enjoyed your content now for over a year and then gone a bit further backwards and found some other stuff that you've worked on in the past, is I guess, how do I ask this question? Have you always been good at being able to assess and analyze things that you take an interest in, or is that something you've had to cultivate and hone over your 10 years in academia, according to the old LinkedIn page, or just over the course of your life, man?
I'm going to do the incredible annoying thing again of just jumping back to something you started off by saying there, which is just coming back to the personality side of things, because it's incredibly hard to come into a close-knit group of very funny people. I like to think of myself as not being unfunny, but the pressure is on when you come into the TIFO realm to be quirky and funny and interesting.
And they've already got their own established characters that people have already kind of associate with them, and it's, well, who are you? And trust me, I've been on other people's channels, it's always, who are you? And you're like, well, you don't know me, you haven't given me a chance yet. Let me do my thing first, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think, you said, well, I've grown into my personality. I think all that's really happened is I've just become more and more comfortable just being myself in that space. Again, coming back to what we were talking about before with learning how to be a video presenter, again, a lot of that has come down to me just being comfortable to be myself in front of a camera. And again, it's as someone who very much isn't the standard kind of YouTube presenter, and Joe likes to remind me every week that he finds it hilarious that he took me and created a YouTuber out of me, the last person in the world that anyone would think you could produce a YouTuber out of. And it works. So yeah, a lot of it's been the ability to work out how your personality works on screen, and I think I've sort of got to a point now where I'm fairly happy with it. But so the other question was about when have I always been an analytic person when it comes to
have you always
football?
had an outlook on things that allows you to, or rather, have you always had a hunger for it, I guess? Have you always just like, I like knowing how it works, I like understanding the context and where it's come from and the why? Like, has that always been a thing for you?
It's a good question. I think, initially I got into the football tactics side of things because I played. And I think a lot of people would be surprised by that, because usually the route into tactics is, not always, but often from a non-playing side. Whereas for me, I went to university and played for my university's first team. So played to a decent level, and was involved in the coaching. I went through the coaching side of things as a player for 4 years when I was at university. And in the final year there, I actually started working with the women's team at the university as well. So I was already starting to think about, how you might do coaching. A lot of that for me was just, this is how I've done it. This is how people have showed me to do it in the past. So I'll just do that kind of thing, but in a different sphere. I then went and did grad work, and while I was there, spent 4 or 5 seasons working with the women's team at the new university I was at. And at that point, it was sort of a lot more serious. I was the head coach, so I was in charge of everything, including driving the minibus round. So we used to drive all over the place to places like Loughborough and Nottingham, and so that was an experience. But when you're in that kind of situation, you start. I am curious enough to be like, well, okay, I've got to sort of understand what we're trying to achieve on the pitch. I've got to find the way that, different coaching methods, different approaches. And when you do that, you necessarily end up with, thinking about the tactical aspects of the game. So for me, I arrived at tactics through having coached, and my interest was very much practical. I then sort of spent a little bit longer where actually it wasn't, I stopped doing the coaching for a little while, and was moving into the media sphere a little bit more. And And yeah, I guess I was sort of more interested in the I guess you could call it high journalism, but I mean, the distinction between high culture and low culture, as you'll know, is bullshit. So, but this idea that people who do journalism should be the people who can write well, and it's about
right. Journalism shouldn't be for the journalists. Journalism should be for everybody. Yeah.
And actually, eventually, I was doing grad work. As you mentioned, I was in academia for about 10 years. I was doing a PhD and was also lecturing at the same time. Got to the end of the PhD, handed in, was given major corrections, and at that point I'd basically run out of funding because I'd been funded to do the PhD, so I was working in a pub to stay alive, and at that point I was doing a huge amount of moonlighting as a football journalist, and at that point I got an offer for a job working for an online outlet as the football editor, and I was like, this is the first foot on the ladder. Either I can spend the next year finishing off a PhD and to essentially like guarantee, well, not even guarantee, but to essentially force myself down the academic route, which originally I'd always thought would be where I ended up, or I can do this have this incredible opportunity to do something that I've always wanted to do. And I went with my gut and said, right, I'll not finish the PhD. I'll go into football journalism, and that's sort of how I ended up going into the journalistic side of things. But at that point, I don't think I was a particularly insightful or profound reader of the game, and so I started getting into it a little bit more. I have a friendship group of people. I actually joined a group chat on Twitter must have been around 2017, with people who now have all ended up getting very good jobs in the industry here, there, and everywhere. And by hook or by crook, they sort of dragged me kicking and screaming towards being able to analyze football a little bit better. By the time 2018-19 happens, we've got Marcelo Bielsa at Leeds, and then that's when I really started thinking, right, I want to understand how this is working. I started a podcast called All Stats Aren't We, which was a Leeds fan podcast, which was focused on the tactics and the stats.
In May of 2018.
There we go. And spent 5 years doing that. It's still running. I still sort of help them out behind the scenes, and it's still going. And I'm incredibly proud of that outlet, because I think we filled a niche that wasn't being filled. We moved the needle in the Leeds United space. We did annoy a lot of people, but because necessarily you annoy people when you talk about tactics and stats and you tell them to trust the process when Pat Bamford's missed another chance.
You annoy people telling people to look both ways crossing the street, brother. It's fine.
Sure, it's true. And yeah, from there I was freelancing at this point because I'd stopped working as the football editor for the company I joined. I did some work for Analytics FC, worked as their head of content for a little while, and then the TIFO job happened. So that's the sort of potted history of how I ended up where I am. But the interest originally was through coaching, and eventually sort of got towards that more technical approach to football tactics. And actually, it's worked out quite nicely. I think I've been able to add something to the media space. And it's, as I said before, an incredibly fun job to be able to think about how football is sort of working behind the scenes.
We've gotten a glimpse into the man's mind, but now we're going to get a glimpse into the man's soul, apparently. Moussa Dembele and Kevin De Bruyne, sequentially your favourite players ever. Discuss.
Yeah, I don't know if it's sacrilege to not have your favourite players ever be players who play for their team, right?
Well, that was the thing. For context, that was in said first video, and they were quote getting to know you, and you said, "Who's my favourite player?" It was a guess who, and it was Leeds players at first. No, it's not Leeds player, and that's uncommon for a football fan. So that was always going to be an interesting jump off. But those were the two names you ended on, and you mentioned that's a look into your soul, and I found the choice of words interesting.
Yeah, I mean, with Moussa Dembele, it was. I think he was the first player that I watched and sort of understood why football tactics was important. And that sounds like a weird thing to say because he's not a particularly tactical player, but he was the player for me who really made me aware of the fact that football is more than just stopping goals and scoring goals. It's about other aspects as well. And on top of that, he's just a breathtaking footballer. I think that sometimes people get the impression of me that I am a sort of cold, calculated lover of nothing. But there are elements of football that I find incredibly evocative and impactful. Maybe not the same kinds of things that other people do, but watching someone like Moussa Dembele and recognizing, this is a guy who's doing things that very few people on the earth have ever been able to do. I think that's the sort of thing that excites me. And I think as well, the stuff that not that you have to work hard to recognize why it's so difficult, why they're doing what they're doing, but the stuff that goes under the radar as well. So I've always been a fan of those midfielders who are, tempo setters, neat and tidy midfielders who help progress the ball and go under the radar because you don't get points for them on fantasy football. And then Kevin De Bruyne, I'm not entirely sure why, but I sort of have a very soft spot for Belgium. I dated someone who was Belgian for a while, and so I've been there quite a bit. This was a sort of period when they did have Moussa Dembele and Kevin De Bruyne. And again, Kevin De Bruyne is one of those players who you're looking at a player who's doing things that, very few people in the history of ever have been able to do. And again, I find that aspect quite evocative when it comes to football too. So I think, those two, if you want to, I mean, the classic Leeds correlate here is my love for Adam Forshaw, who again no one would ever think of when they were thinking about the Leeds United greats, but he's a similarly important tempo setting, neat and tidy, progressive midfielder. But my first Leeds love was Tony Yeboah. I sort of got into football around the '94 World Cup, and then I got into football around friends who are Leeds fans. My parents met at Bradford University, so we grew up in the area, and we had a lot of friends from that area. And I got into football when we were around them on holiday during the '94 World Cup, and they were like, "Well, if you like football, you like Leeds." So and so I was okay, fine, I'm a Leeds fan. And then in '95 was Leeds signed Yeboah, and then I was like, right, this is it. I am a Leeds fan now. That was the moment where I realised it. So. Yeah, there's a potted history of some of the players that I like, but it's funny, isn't it, talking about players that you like, because like on the one hand, who cares? There's plenty of footballers out there, and the things that I like about a footballer aren't necessarily that important. I always have to try and remind myself of this when you're in a position of being publicly influential, which is a terrible thing to say because it shouldn't be the case that I have this influence, but you have to be careful what you say because it becomes narrative. Yes. I feel funny of talking about the stuff that I think is fun or interesting, because in many respects it can just be I just like this thing, and I don't need to explain it, and people don't need to like it, and people don't need it explaining almost. But those are the sort of like aesthetics of footballer that I really like.
I have another question to ask you as a result of that, but you've touched on something there, and I'd love to get your input on this, because you say you're now in a position where if you say something and it just so happens that a bunch of people agree and a bunch of people disagree, it goes into the discourse, and then it becomes a narrative-driven argument rather than a point-based, merit-based discussion. And that's part of the problem with the hyperbolic nature of football coverage, because it's not so much whether or not a point is good or bad, it's whether or not it catches fire with the fan base a lot of the time. I won't say all the time, obviously, because you mentioned Moussa Dembele as like that awakening type player where you're like, wait, so they don't all score worldies, and they don't all just clatter someone with 15 feet sliding tackles, and then you watch him and you learn to appreciate him. That was a generation of, like my lot. My Spurs supporting comrades were all massive lovers of Mr Dembele's work because they knew what he did for the team. And so the other thing about Kevin De Bruyne that's also interesting, that I think it kind of mirrors your own journey, is it's the road less travelled. Goes to Chelsea, loan, comes back, still not appreciated, goes to Wolfsburg, smashes it, comes to City, but 50 million quid. I mean, that's a lot of money. And then 50 million quid lows, we got him for 50 million quid. Like, there's something interesting about those two picks. So what I wanted to ask about those two picks is there anything personally that you see in them that you that endears them to you in that respect, that they are hard-working, even though Kevin De Bruyne has become a worldwide superstar, overshadowed now by Haaland and Foden and a lot of other players that come in and steal the ultimate headlines. Like, is that something you kind of you really appreciate in terms of just your own personal appreciation, or is it just those particular players that hold a special place? Is that something? I guess what I'm saying is hard work and that road less travelled but persisting through it all something that you like to see in football particularly, or is it just those players in particular and their traits that you're fond of?
I think everyone likes those footballers who succeed against the odds, right? So I don't think I'm particularly unique in that respect. And again, maybe my response to this would be more sort of the footballers that we like, I think, are more to do with the experiences we have in life where we come across them, the moments we're in when we come across them, right? So, like I said, Tony Yeboah, he was there at a point in my life when, I wasn't quite into football. He turned up, he did exciting things. And then as a result of that, he became, a very influential sort of, I don't know, footballer for me, essentially. Every generation will have a different player like that, right? So the Leeds United does all love David Batty because he came along at the same sort of point, right? And I think that's more what I would take away from my love of certain players, is that I think that they arrived for me in my life at a point when they filled some sort of not need, but they filled a moment where it was like, okay, it makes sense. Like I said with Dembele, it was more okay. Like now I kind of understand what midfielders are doing. Yeah, with De Bruyne, I suppose with De Bruyne, it's funny because I sort of picked him very early as being a very good midfielder. I said to my friends, it's funny, I wish I'd written this down somewhere. I try not to have hot takes for this precise reason, but this is one I wish that I had written down. But I said to them when he left Chelsea, I said one day he'll be a top 10 midfielder in the world. And I'm like, well, that's a pretty general thing to say, isn't it? But I kind of wish I'd said top 5. But so I think for me, like a big part of that was just seeing him succeed and realizing that I'd seen something in him that actually did come to fruition as well. So yeah, I don't think there's any sort of grand, deep narrative here about, I like people who work hard. I think it's more just these are the sorts of midfielders that I like. There's a nerd quality to it, right? And I think a lot of nerds want to be like, oh yeah, I saw something that no one else saw, and it's not worth anything really. But
you say that. Sorry to jump in, but the reason I asked that question is because the generation before you, my generation, the generation before me, I think we were kind of that first generation that was starting to be brought up on the notion that these people were superheroes. These are hometown hero come good wasn't a thing really in the latter years of the 90s, where a lot of teams were starting to import players from the continent, and rivalries were forged, but the people could cross lines. And I've seen a generation of, in fact, I'm outing you again, they'll support multiple teams. It's not a question of loyalty to teams anymore. It's loyalties to brands of players almost. So the fact that I take your point. I mean, no one begrudges someone coming from nothing and achieving worldwide stardom. That's always a great thing. But I find it interesting that those two players seem to have that, like I say, road less traveled yet come good quality to them, rather than, man, I was watching Ruud van Nistelrooy and he scored 6 goals in a game. I was watching Alan Shearer and he belted one in from 30 yards, and I was a lover from that point. So it was interesting to me because that again speaks to this idea that you're looking at football more broadly at an earlier point in your life, even if it was subconsciously. There was that underlying, there's something there. I can't explain it to you because it's not in the numbers and it's not on a headline page somewhere. And I think that's interesting. That's all I wanted to point out there.
Yeah, and look, it's worth saying as well that stylistically, I played football, like I said, quite a lot. I played a lot when I was growing up. I played, when I was at universities, I was able to play 2 times a weekend or 2 times a week competitively, plus training, plus I could play, casual football as well at the weekend as well. So between the ages of about 18 and about 33, I was playing football competitively 90 minutes twice a week, so 180 minutes a week. That's a long period to play a lot of football. And so in that time, I spent a lot of time thinking about what it's like to be a footballer who plays in a certain way. So I started out basically as a striker because I was very rapid, and I did the thing of slowing down and moving back down the field, and actually really enjoyed playing midfield way more than I enjoyed playing striker, because I think at that level when you play striker you just don't do anything. People talking about I think Kyogo Furuhashi plays for Celtic under Ange last season's having something like 14 touches of the ball during 90 minutes, and people talking about that now because what does Ange expect from his striker? Well, actually not a lot of ball touches, and it's the same when you're playing at that level. You sort of upper end amateur level. You do a lot of just running after balls that you'll never get, or dragging players out of the way, or whatever. It's very, very boring. So I very much enjoyed then dropping deeper and just being able to use my technicality a little bit more. And when you do that, you spend a huge amount of time often in those games as well at that level, winning the ball back and then recycling it, and then some chump further down the field just losing the ball willfully, and then you have to go through the thing again, right? So I spent a huge amount of time doing a lot of that, which was tempo setting, winning the ball back, recycling it. And when I was watching football, then certain players who had to do a lot of that, the guys who will never get man of the match, usually, but who actually play an incredible role in terms of what the team's doing. I think I sort of felt a little bit of camaraderie for them. And it's funny the things you remember, isn't it? I remember playing a game once where I was doing a lot of that. I was doing a lot of battling, a lot of winning the ball back, recycling, moving it down the field. And there was a guy on the touchline, the opposition coach, and he said, I think I was playing number 10, and he said, "Come on, guys, number 10 is running this game at the moment." And that's my proudest moment. This is just a complete nothing game on a field in a university league. And someone's saying, this guy's running the game, and I was like, yeah, that's it. I've made it. That's what I want. That's what I want to achieve. So I think that could be the origin story for my love of those kind of midfielders.
Oh, God bless you. I mean, look, that's still my only claim to fame on a football. It wasn't even a pitch. It was a five-a-side. I lobbed someone. Those half goals? I lobbed someone from about 5 yards. Now, granted, 40-odd years old and both knees are gone, and I probably didn't do him any favours when I lobbed him, but I lobbed someone from 5 feet under a 5-foot bar in Converse. So, man,
and that's what football is about, man. It's about those memories.
Stories. It's about those wow moments, 100%.
And for every level, and that's something I love about football is the egalitarian nature of it, right? The football pyramid is important because it links all of us together. It keeps going down, right? You go from the Premier League all the way down, keep going down, and then you arrive at the level that you and I are playing at. And again, I find that incredibly evocative as well, because having played an incredible amount of football for 15 years or so, I have memories that I can with clarity remember things happening on football pitches, and that's what it is about for me. It's about something happened and it was a good thing that happened, and it doesn't matter that it wasn't on the stage of the Premier League. Football enabled me to do something where I was like, I did something there, and it was at the upper level of what I could achieve. And I think that's what's great about football is that whatever level you're playing at, you can have those kind of experiences and have those kind of memories. You can't, I play football still very badly because having played so much, I've absolutely thrashed my body. My body is nerfed to bits now, so I've nowhere near the athleticism I had when I was at my peak. But we come off the pitch and we talk about what happened, right? We come off and we do punditry on the games that we've just had. 11 people played in a game. 22 people were on the pitch, and we're out there being like, this is, we can assess that game. We can talk about the moments, and it matters. And that's all my job is, right? On a more fundamental level, it's everyone coming together, having seen the same game and sharing those sorts of experiences. This is what we saw. It was great. Something was achieved that is the upper bound of what that person can achieve. And I think that's what's great about football punditry, right? It's that shared experience of coming together and being like, we all saw this. Right, we all saw this, and it was good. We were there. Yeah.
The sign of a good guest when he eliminates the need for questions that you've written in advance because he just answers them all by himself.
That's a bad guest.
No, that's
what
a
that is.
Great guest, because it means that I then don't have to ham-fistedly find segues into things by saying that's really interesting. However, handbrake turn. Because one of the things I did want to ask you is, like, as an analyst, as someone that has to watch it as part of your living and as part of just being able to keep... And look, football and YouTube, if there's two things that never stop, just perpetual motion machine, baby, it's YouTube and football. So grind is a thing. Burnout could be a thing. The ability, the need to decompress is a thing. But it can also lead to that reticence, that resistance to the thing that you love. And I guess the thing I wanted to ask is, like, what are some of the things that still blow your mind about football that keep you engaged on that more emotional, that more, get the Cantona thing, the soul of football, whatever you want to call it, that sort of more human element of football? What really keeps you engaged on that basis, do you think?
It's funny because I think there's a couple of different levels at which that happens, because I can watch a game as a fan and watch a team that is got nothing to do with me and get completely absorbed in the prima facie experience of watching football and want a team to win and want the other team to lose and get pissed off because it goes against me, or get mildly elated because it goes the right way. But weirdly, I think that experience of supporting a team gets impacted by being an analyst, I think, because the reason why I can watch another team as a fan and sort of get caught up in the face value game that's going on is because I don't care about either of those teams really. Whereas when you are a fan and so I covered Leeds for 5 seasons. We had the Bielsa years and it was absolutely glorious, and then we had an absolute shit show since then. Like absolutely from the point. It's funny because the season we finished 9th on the podcast, we pissed a lot of people off because we said the last 10 games Leeds overperformed by miles, and we were quite dour at the end of that season because we said the numbers and some of the things we're seeing on the field have actually made us think that things are going to be much harder next season. And that's what transpired. So from that point onwards, I think the last 10 games of the season where we finished 9th, literally anything that could go wrong went wrong. Like you couldn't write it worse than the way it went. So it results in not enough players being signed for Bielsa football falling to pieces, Bielsa being yeeted out 10 games to go in the most amount of indignity that you've ever seen a manager lead. Like, and this guy is
Bielsa yeeted out. Jesus Christ.
But this is the guy who effectively was the difference between us being a championship side and a Premier League side, well, regardless of what the ownership think. He gets ingloriously dumped and replaced by Jesse Marsh, who, again, has like a 10-game stretch where he overperforms and we're lucky to stay up. We then buy in a load of players for him, and we buy in all of these players with these nuts relegation clause contracts. We just about, like I say, the skin of the teeth have stayed up the season before, and then last season, the rest is history. And we go through the indignity of having to have about 7 managers in quick succession, one of whom is Sam Allardyce. So and then we get to this summer, right? And you think, okay, we'll reset championship football. Everything's going to be good. We've spent 300 million over the course of 3 seasons in terms of net buys. There must be some value in this squad. And then half the squad goes off on these insane loan clauses, and then we refuse to sell anyone else. So I mean, so far this summer, I believe Leeds have made £3 million in sales from a squad that was nominally worth 300 million at the time. And yeah, everyone's gone, and we're in a situation now where it's looking pretty sketchy for us to get back into the Premier League. So things have gone pretty much as badly as they could go. And let me tell you, the experience of covering a club that behaves in that way, it makes it really hard for you to enjoy what's going on. And because it's not just the players on the pitch that you're you're rooting for, which is what happens when you just watch a game of football, right? It's, the people who are in charge of the decision making, the owners, and you have to deal with the owner like tweeting nonsense. The director of football, you get to scrutinize over a long period the sorts of deals he's made, and you realize how bad it is. And it gets to a point where you kind of, your patience wears very thin to actually want that group of people to do well.
Especially when you're one of those people that are using everything within your power to at least try and understand what's going on, and then you see solutions, and I get that you don't have the full context in the situation, but you are left wondering, why aren't you doing this? I figured it out and I don't work for you, sort of thing. So that must be frustrating, that sort of, not impotent, but that sort of benign banging on the glass door, Charlie in the chocolate factory on the outside of the sweet shop rage that we all feel as football fans sometimes.
Yeah, I think so. And again, this is not to say that I could have done a better job. I think it's just when you're watching from the outside and it goes that badly, it becomes very hard. I think it's hard anyway to retain that sort of naive fandom that a lot of people just love about football, and it is great. Like I say, I enjoy that naive fandom when I'm just watching a game between two teams that I don't follow, but it's very hard to keep that up, I think, when you are analysing a specific club to any sort of level. And I think because Leeds were essentially an experiment in being the worst run club over that period, it sort of had a negative effect on my love for them. So I'm still in rehab now. I still find it hard to care enough about watching their games. I am healing for sure, but I'm not quite there yet. And it's a funny one, isn't it? Because I think so much of what I do now, you mentioned before, the youth of today, they follow players, right? And I follow managers, man. That's what I do. There's managers that I love and want to see do well, and that, I guess, gives me a little bit more joy than just the idea of supporting a club. It's sort of saying this guy has a view of how football should be played, and I want to see that do well. So I care about Ange Postecoglou. I watched pretty much every game Celtic played when he was their coach. Same with Iraola, who's now at Bournemouth. I watched pretty much every game of the last 2 seasons of Rayo Vallecano. Why on earth, I don't know. But I now find myself caring about Bournemouth doing okay this season. So maybe there's some kind of malaise inherent in my approach to football now. But I don't know. I think it's again, that's the interesting thing about football, isn't it? It's
I think there, by the way, you've just described the difference between watching two people play FIFA and playing FIFA. There's a noticeable and distinct difference of buy-in and reaction to when the controller's not reacting properly. It's a thing we all experience for sure. And one of the things that you've touched on there, and in fact, no, actually, I have to comment on something first. For y'all that don't watch professional wrestling, that's an exercise in just cutting a promo and sticking to the point. That was magnificently funny. I know you probably weren't meaning every point to be funny, but as a fan, as an Arsenal fan, I brought props. See, I own a shirt, fuckers. I go once a year, when I can afford it. Cost of living. But the point is that that impotent sort of rage that you feel, right? Okay, in that situation, but you've at least backed it up to know that what you're feeling and what you're looking at is based on stuff that you have spent time really agonized over to kind of arrive at a conclusion. Your job, in a lot of ways, is to provide information to a fan base that predominantly or preeminently is emotional. They are emotionally invested in their teams. It's something they've grown up with. It's part of their community. It's in many people's eyes, it's part of their identity, or even further, may I say, their religion. And as a result, a lot of hyperbole gets put into the conversation. A lot of narrative gets put into the conversation. And again, you're in many ways seen as an enemy of that in people's eyes when you're trying to just bring to them facts. Like, you're just trying to say, hey, listen, I don't think, not that I'm saying you said this, but I don't think selling Harry Kane's that big of a deal because of the system that's in place and the players that think. And the vitriol that might come back to you is, you don't understand. You're not a member of our club. So what I wanted to ask is, how do you contend with that in an online sphere where you're trying to not cater to, but you're trying to provide to an audience potentially that might be buying into that? And how do you provide something that can speak to the person that is maybe married to that hyperbole, maybe married to that drama element of football, and could do with it? How do you go about doing that?
I think the most important word in this respect is tone, because I think there's situations where I've come out and made videos that are absolutely correct, but if you misjudge the tone, then you can needlessly piss off a fan base.
Right, 100%.
So a good example of that is the Aston Villa video I did after Unai Emery arrives, and they, in the time since he arrives, they're basically second in the table on the points table for the Premier League. And I made a video which was like, Aston Villa aren't as good as you think, because a lot of people think, well, they're second in the table on the points table since he's arrived, therefore they must be the second best team in the Premier League in that time period. And my point was simply, this is probably not representative of the level that Villa are at, but I used the word lucky. And whilst I believe that you can use the word lucky in that way, I think a lot of fans get wound up if you say that something is lucky. So what I meant by that was that there's certain games where, just things variance the right way for them. In fact, most of their games, they got the better the better series of outcomes.
Yeah, the odd refereeing decision, the bounce of the ball on the day, and it could be
like
anything.
And that's the point I was making. But again, there's a lot of people who interpret that as you're saying that actually we're not good, we just got lucky, which is, again, it's not what I was saying, and I would stand by everything I said in that video.
Those two statements don't have to be mutually exclusive.
But I think that the thing that I learned from that video is that you do have to think about tone as well. And that was something that I hadn't thought about that much when I was making the video, because I guess I'm used to operating in a sphere where I'm often talking to people who are working in the industry, and so you use shorthand terms like luck or variance to explain roughly what's going on. And if you do that to a public audience, you have to be aware of the ramifications of what that might be. So yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of people, when you work in the media and you get a lot of people responding to what you do, and obviously you're in the public eye, you do get a lot of people pushing back on it. So there's weird things like the fact that Man United fans think that all my analysis is bad because I'm a Leeds fan, and that they're entitled to think that. I like to think that there is some value in my analysis despite that fact, but that's sort of how it comes out in the wash. I think what's very easy to do when you're in that situation where, there's a number of different fan bases who I've pissed off at various times. And it's funny, actually, if you go through some of the social media comments, I've been accused of being a fan of pretty much every club in the Premier League because they're convinced that I'm so biased against them, I must be a fan of their rival. Maybe that means I'm doing a good job. I don't know. But I think it's very easy to sort of set up a siege mentality and be like, oh, this is what the public do, the great unwashed public do. But what I try and do in all of these situations is reassess. And maybe this is the result of 10 years spent in academia. 10 years spent in academia thinking about, my PhD was on philosophies of subjectivity, right, which is to do with how you perceive the world. And I think when you read modern philosophy that much, you become very sanguine about the possibility that I could be wrong about something. That when you read that amount of philosophical treatises on actually how many things can go wrong when you're walking down the street and trying to perceive what's going on around you, then very quickly you become aware of the fact that being wrong is something that is a possibility. So I think that's something I've tried to take on board, and the experience of being in academia is very much to be, that what we say is always up for debate. There's always the possibility that someone else's take is better. And that's something I've tried to take with me at TIFO as well. I always try and learn from situations. I always try and reassess and think, right, it's easy for me to be like, oh, this is just fans who hate me because I've said something negative about their club. I always try and treat those situations actually, rather than sort of becoming insular by being like, okay, let me rethink through what I've done there. And I think that's an incredibly useful skill and tool to have. I think it's incredibly hard to do because my gut response in these situations is always fuck them, and there's an extent to which you need to do that because you need to be able to function, right? You need to be able to function, and one of the ways that you do that is just by having that kind of trigger that allows you to keep going forwards.
Just being able to dismiss an argument out of hand that you're like, listen, man, we've only got so many years on this planet. I can't engage with you on this one. Sorry. Sure.
Yeah, and look, my colleagues always tell me that. So one of the things that one of the sort of watchwords that we have is like, don't read the comments, right? And there's value in that. And I very often don't read the comments, particularly on videos where I know that the comments will be particularly brutal. But at the same time, I think that it's, even if I may err too far on that side of, you know, taking things to heart too much, but I think that that's been a really fundamental aspect to why I've improved so quickly as an analyst. I think I don't think I'm anywhere near the finished product when it comes to analysis, but I think the ability to be able to, you know, suck it up and say, okay, I was maybe wrong on this, that maybe I missed something here, is an incredibly important aspect of how to improve. And actually, that level of curiosity and willingness to accept that, you know, the thing that I am analysing out there is way bigger than my perceptive faculties is actually a really important way of being able to take it seriously and make sure that you're never just crystallising your ideas and falling back on old things. That there's always the possibility that, you know, those things can change. Maybe I've missed something, you know, and I think that's, for me, that's the most important, I think, watchword for me as an analyst, is to never feel as though, you know, I've fully analysed everything. I can think that I've understood a game. I can read something on Twitter where someone does a different analysis of the game and be like, do you know what? I think that they've actually hit on a better way of assessing that game as well. So, yeah, I can't even remember where we were, but that was a bit of a ramble by me. But yeah, I just don't want to come across as though I feel as though I've got the answers to everything and that I understand everything. For me, a big part of my job is being in the process of being able to just consume myself in football and learn things from it. And I think, you know, that doesn't mean to say that I feel as though I arrived. Sometimes it can seem to people from the outside that when you're a member of the media and you're sort of putting out these videos, you're sort of saying this is how it is. So yeah, that's the thing that I most want to avoid falling into, that habit of being like, well, I'm paid to do this, so therefore my view is worth more, because I don't think that's true.
No, because, and you've hit on something there, that the idea that, right, so this is my opinion for what it's worth is translated loosely to, so this is how you think it all is well, hang on, no. All I'm doing is I'm trying to bring to you as much context, as much information, as much statistical analysis. I'll let you know what my biases are in advance, so you can just process it yourself. I'm not really here to tell you what to do with this. I'm just bringing this to you. And that's, like I say, that's what you're competing with ultimately, in the sense that there are plenty of people, and I would argue again, the other reason why it's a great idea to switch from a more personality cult-based presentation style is because, fuck me, if there's not every single fan-based YouTube channel doing the exact same thing, yelling indiscriminately into cameras up and down the country about passion and desire being the root cause of their problems, rather than, nah, our left back's injured and we've had to reconfigure the setup as a result of the playing style being contingent on him making runs. Well, that's not sexy, that's not bombastic, and that's not, you can't make that into a clever pun on the back of a newspaper. It's just easier to say, oh, you know, game's gone or whatever. So one of the last two questions, if I may, because I know that we're Mr. Mackenzie is incredibly busy, you see, and he's afforded me 1 hour of his time and not a minute more. So I'll make these last.
Feel free to go wherever you need us to go.
Unbelievable. Right, I'm going to have to stop this right now. I had this conversation with Seb Stafford-Bloor, man. Come on, you're a goddamn rock star. You're on the face of a 1 million+ sub channel. You are a god amongst men of analysts. You are the man. You tell me, puny human, I am very busy and I must do very many things more important than this. So ask your questions and be on your way.
Oh, I think I lost you a bit there. Sorry.
Do you know what? That's perfect, because that means that all of my tirade is going to have been recorded, and your response is basically just dismissing it, which is actually kind of funny to me, to be honest. Well, okay.
I'm sorry.
No,
you said the last thing I heard was "God amongst men," and I was about to respond vociferously denying that fact. So
he didn't get a chance. So you see, I got him on that one. So okay, all right, bringing it back down. Just let me see that bombastic and narrative driven. Let me ask you two last little things that I just want to get your input on, because I think one of the interesting things about what you do is this idea that, like, you've kind of hit on the nail. You're bringing this to people, you're trying to make it palatable to them, but you're also, like you say, like with your analysis, you're not trying to get into a rut. You're not trying to present it the same way every single time. You're trying to bring new little things. You're trying to do little things. So I guess what I want to ask is not what you're doing. What goes through your mind when you're trying to make a particular topic more palatable generally? What goes through your mind when you're trying to bring a new idea to people that maybe they won't understand at first, and you need to, right, follow me a little bit here. I need you to just come along with me on this journey before you dismiss it out of hand. What goes through your mind when you try to approach that sort of thing?
Well, I think coming back to what I was saying before, because I have that attitude that I could be wrong and I don't think anything's fixed, I just spend a lot of time watching football and force myself to do it because, that's the only way I feel as though I can justify the things that I'm saying. So I make sure that I'm watching enough football to justify the ideas that I have. But let me tell you, I think that the experience of watching a lot of football, I sit down and watch a game, and I watch all games at 2 times speed. So it's only 45 minutes a game, but I sit down to watch a game, and it's sort of like watching a TV series, right? 45-minute episode. I sit down and I'm like, do I always want to watch? Do I always want to watch this? It's a commitment. It's it's nominally, like, football games are very similar, right? We can find all of the minutiae, etc., and distinguish between what's going on, but they're all very similar. But my experience has always been that if I put the time and effort in and watch a game and think about it critically, stuff always comes out to me. There's always things that I learned from those games. And so in many respects, like, I consider my job to be putting the time and effort in to watch the football, see what's going on, and then just tell people what's happening. So for me, that's the most important thing. It is evident. I don't want to say evidence-led because it makes it sound like I'm doing sort of science, but it is prompted by the games. I sit down and I watch them and I'm like, this is something that's happening. And football. A lot of people, I think, get bored by football, and I understand it, but football, in terms of the level of the tactical of what's going on, the top-down stuff that coaches are doing, and then some of the more, you break it down into groups of players, dynamic groups of players. So 3v4, 4v4, 2v2, and then you have the individuals as well. There's so much going on at every level that you'll always find something that coaches are doing in there if you spend the time and effort watching it. It took me a lot of time to get good enough to be able to read that, I think. And I'm still obviously way off the pace in many respects. But whenever people ask me, like, oh, how do I get to do what you do? I say, look, there's no people say this because they want to think that there's like a magic trick, right? People want to feel as though there's, you plug in some kind of formula and you read a book or you watch a video and suddenly it just makes you incredible at analysing football. And that's not the case. The thing that makes you good at analysing football is watching thousands of hours of football and learning the context and it becoming a part of you, to the extent that you know what the baseline is, and then you start recognizing things that stand out. And it's incredibly boring, and it's incredibly hard work, and it's incredibly it's incredibly time consuming.
Yeah, it comes from the fact that the game is driven almost by the mistake. The mistake is what leads to the goal, and you only get 2 or 3 of those a game. And it's really what it is. It's an exhibition of the power of tactics and strategy, because in a perfectly execute strategy, you don't concede, but you score. And how do you replicate
I'm going to respond to this.
Go for it. Please.
One of my least favourite sayings about football is that the perfect game would be 0-0. I think that's utterly bullshit. Because
I wouldn't say that, but
yeah, sure. I'm not accusing you of this. I'm just saying that a lot of the time I hear this, and as someone who people like to call an out of possession expert, something I talk about a lot, I'm actually not that bothered by clean sheets, weirdly. And I think a lot of people sort of assume that if you're a defensive specialist, then it's like, oh yeah, I'm happy if we didn't concede. But the way that I understand out of possession play is that what you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce the chances of something happening in a certain way, right? Football is a dynamic game. In many respects, it's not quite a zero-sum game, but you're trying to do something that is either stopping or overcoming something that someone else is trying to do. And I think there's certain situations where you can defend a situation as well as you could hope to defend it and still concede. And I think there's situations where you can in a way that is as good as you could hope to attack and not score. So I push back against that stuff a little bit, because the idea that you cancel one another out if you play the perfect game of football, I don't think is necessarily true. And let me tell you, there's been plenty of games of football that have ended 0-0 where it wasn't the perfect game of football. But for me, a lot of it is just about affordances. It's about being able to get the upside in certain situations and hope that things fall for you so that you actually manage to score, or you assess where the opposition are going to attack through, and you do your best to make it as difficult as possible for them to progress the ball through those situations. But football is so variable, it's so stochastic, that there's so many things that can go wrong even though they go right, and go right even though they go wrong, that it's just, I just do not buy the argument that the perfect game of football ends 0-0. So that's just another little rant for you there.
No, that's fine. For anyone in that sense of football is can be robotic and all the rest of it, I'll never forget a goal being allowed after it bounces off a Liverpool beach ball, whenever that was. That for me will stand the test of time as evidence that football at its heart is still kind of a little bit bonkers when you really think about what we're actually doing. We're chasing a ball around a pitch, trying to put it between a couple of rectangles. It's kind of mad, isn't it? Yeah, but don't we all love it? Yeah, I suppose. But
Indeed. I did just end the previous bit by saying that watching a lot of football can be incredibly boring, but I do agree that football is fun.
Football. I think that's the same with anything. I mean, look, I'll put myself in this. I used to review games, and I used to review some really, really good games. But when you review 5 games a week, it's just give me something a little bit different. What is it? And it's exactly the same as the last 20 things. It doesn't make it any less good on its own merits, but you yourself, when it's your job, man, it gets the grind is real. It's a real thing.
And I don't think people understand that the things that are fun about football are not the things that we focus on when we're analysing football, right? There's a huge amount of my job that is spent watching out of possession shapes, or is trying to assess the way that the teams are trying to progress the ball, or trying to generate chances in certain areas of the field. That stuff is, a lot of it's like pattern recognition, a lot of it's to do with trying to work out intentions from what can often be a sort of variable mess as well. So the thing that's fun about football is not the thing that people who cover football or work in football spend their time looking at. They don't just sit there watching loads of goals being like, that's a good goal. It's a lot. My point with all of this is that I've got where I've got to by putting in a huge amount of legwork and working really hard, and having to go through, the boringness of watching, some games I'll watch 3, 4, 5 times if I'm doing a video on it, just to make sure that I've got down what I want to say. And it's boring. I sit down and I'm like, I don't want to do this. It's the last thing I want to do. I say that because a lot of people contact me and say, how do I get to where you're at? And the answer is you do a lot of hard work, and you get very lucky as well. I've used that word luck, so it'll probably piss people off. But it's...
Well, hang on. JJ Bull, you might have heard of him. He described luck as being at the bar more often than not when the rich, powerful businessman walks in and he gives you the contract. And I said, is what you're saying just luck is a combination of persistence and confidence? Well, yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. I take your point. Look, you get lucky in the fact that the opportunity comes your way, but there's nothing lucky about the fact that what you're doing is you're coming to people with ultimately an opinion, but that opinion is not predicated on a feeling. It's predicated on the confidence of hundreds, if not thousands, of hours spent trying to understand the why of the thing, rather than trying to infer the why of the thing. And I think that's why it's fascinating what you guys try to do in an industry where, look, as much as someone like Gary Neville and Jamie Redknapp are respected for their respective contributions to their teams as legendary status, let's be honest, they're famous now for yelling at each other. Like, that's the thing. They come out with loud and bombastic statements, it's debated for a week, and then they do a show the following week. That's one style of football coverage, and there's nothing wrong with that in essence, so long as you're not using that to form the basis of why you're giving bullshit to players on the match day. I think that's just always been a thing with me. So I totally understand where you're coming from there, and I also understand the idea that people would come out of the woodwork and say, man, I could do what you do. Where's my opportunity to be a YouTube sensation? You go, listen, man, I don't really have an answer for you because I don't think you're prepared to walk down the road I walk down.
Yeah, and look, don't get me wrong. I think anyone could do what I do. I don't think that I'm some. Yes, they could. They absolutely could. They absolutely could.
Could they though? I mean, I asked that because I don't think JJ gave himself enough credit. I don't think even Joe, he gives himself a lot of credit. But even he didn't give himself enough credit when I say, listen, man, you guys have a combination and a blend of things that is so potent, but deliberate. It wasn't an accident how a lot of this stuff come together. It came through from consideration. And consideration often has to fly in the face of general consensus. A lot of people, I imagine, were telling you guys, hey man, what you need is Joe to come in with a couple of confetti guns and Alex Stewart to be sat there with a Barney hat on his head and then talk about football later, rather than, no guys, we're here to do this thing, and if we do it right, the audience will come. And they have. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
No, I agree, but my point here is simply that I don't think that I should be put on a pedestal in any way, because I am just a guy who watches a lot of football and says what I see, and there's a lot there that people should push back against and say, okay, I've watched the tape and I think you're wrong. And there's a lot of people on Twitter who I respect a lot who will slide into my DMs and say, I thought this wasn't quite right, and I value that. I value that so much because that is the thing that makes me realize, I'm not done yet. I've got to open Y Scout again. I've got to load the game up. I've got to watch it again. And that feeling of not having arrived yet is what impels me forward, but is also, I think, what makes me interesting, because I'm constantly at a point where I'm like, I need to be ahead of the curve. Because of my job, because I'm at the point where people are going to take what I say seriously. So I put the time and effort in to make sure that what I'm saying is, one, true, and two, look for things. I try to be, it's hard to be ahead of the curve because, I cover football
with something, football with a billion eyes on it at any one time.
Yeah, exactly. And like we cover, the Premier League and then the big clubs around Europe, and then, whatever else falls in between the gaps. There's plenty of people out there, there's plenty of kids out there now who are following one team. And so they'll watch every game of that team a few times. They know exactly the valences of what's going on with that team, what's, the tactical tweaks that are happening, the players who have developed in that team. They know the youth system inside out. They know what's going on at the level of like squad building. They know the finances. And I'm having to put myself out in that kind of sphere, right? If I make a video on Arsenal, there's hundreds of people out there who know way more about Arsenal than I will ever know. And so, that impels me onwards to make sure that I'm trying to keep abreast of what's going on at a lot of these clubs. That requires a huge amount of work, a huge amount of effort. But the result is that when I get those moments where I'm like, I've picked up on something here ahead of time, right? No one else has got this, and it's right. That's the pearl of juice. That's the pearl of wisdom that I'm going for, right? It's that little thing that, and I'm like, that was. I influenced the conversation, and I feel as though I was right. I got something right there. So that's the thing that impels me on. But it means that I have to work very hard, because this stuff doesn't happen because I have some kind of genius eye. This stuff happens because I sit down, I watch the tape again and again and again to find out these things that are happening. So if anyone wants to do the stuff that I do, they can do it, but they're going to have to sit down and watch a lot of tape. And I don't have any responsibility. I'm unmarried. I have no kids. I can nominally just spend my life doing football stuff. That's the cost of what it is to do the thing that I do right now, is to actually sacrifice a lot of my time at the moment to be able to do the stuff that I do. It may not be the case that I'll always want to do that, and I hope that at some point in my life I do develop a personality. But I think that
Stop! No, I have to stop. Not only do I disagree with the fact that anyone could do it, I know what you're saying. You could if you did, but people don't. Let's be honest. It's the same as, look, I could have a six-pack right now if I was in the gym, but I have a family pack to feed the family. It's just the way it goes. And secondly, free time, what's that like? And thirdly, look, I totally take a lot of what you're saying, but I would also push back and say that's the exception, not the norm in football coverage in my mind. A lot of it, this is why I find what you do so fascinating, because you are you're inherently trying to go against the grain of an industry and a fandom that is emotive, that is motivated by loyalty a lot of the time, and is insular a lot of it. And all you're doing a lot of the time is just trying to make something A, entertaining, B, informative, and hopefully C, like you say, there's a nugget here of something you won't have seen anywhere else. And what I will say is that it's amazing. I tweet them when I find them, because whenever I watch a video of yours, specifically on the sensible transfers, and I say, hey, look, they called it, and they called it weeks ago, and it wasn't in any of the papers and stuff, that's not by accident. That's always because you guys have done the legwork, and you've gone, look, I get you guys want to sign Verratti because his name's been in the paper, but we've done some digging, the same kind of digging that the professionals would do, and I just want to let you know, if they're smart, this is who they look at. Not everyone can do that, man. I think that is incredibly unique and special that you guys are able to hone in on that. I really do.
Yeah, you may be right, but I would like to say at this juncture, we absolutely nailed the Spurs transfer, sensible transfers video this time around. I'm quite pleased with that one. So I'll allow myself to bask in the glory of that one. I
forwarded that one to one of my friends, as did the West Ham video. I think you guys have done a pretty good job there. And I think I don't think anyone could have seen how the Caicedo and Lavia stuff had gone. That's just a very weird transfer saga to tell my grandkids about one day. Oh, let me tell you the saga where Chelsea signed everybody. But
the summer of 23 where Saudi Arabia bailed out Chelsea.
That whole thing. I mean, obviously, if we had that deserves its own podcast for someone way more qualified than me to speak about, because I look at it like a fan and go, this is weird, but it's one of those things. So okay, I'll sneak in one last question after this. Very, very quick ones though, I promise you. WTF moments in your career? What are the moments in your career, either prior to your stint in TIFO and in your football writing career, just on a personal level, or in TIFO and when you got into the football writing sphere? Like, what were those moments that you went, I can't fucking believe I'm doing this. This is fucking incredible. Like, what were some of those moments for you?
One of the first footballers I spoke to, in fact, it was the first, was Kevin De Bruyne in a mixed zone. That was pretty nuts. I mentioned already that we've got an exciting podcast episode happening over the international break. Basically, I've been given an hour to speak to a Premier League manager. That's definitely a WTF moment for me in my career as well. And I guess, I don't know, the other thing is just like a day-to-day general WTF when I see... Well, the other day we had the Premier League predictions video that went up, and we ended up 6th highest trending video on YouTube, next to people like Mr Beast and the artists, I'm reliably informed, who are known as the Sidemen, and the brothers Paul. I don't know if you know those two. So that was a surreal moment as well. That we'd reached a point where actually we are moving the needle in the YouTube space. We are in the same sort of sphere and stratosphere. Obviously, like very much towards the bottom of that particular level of the stratosphere. But we're getting there as well. So I've been incredibly lucky, Lorne, in my career, and I enjoy and value what I do every day.
I'm just going to stop you again. I'm sorry. If you denigrate yourself, I have this here to shoot at the small children running past my window making noise when I do my podcast. I will shoot you through this lens if you self-denigrate one more time. God, sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been good. There's been a few, and I've enjoyed my time at TIFO immensely.
I wasn't expecting to threaten Mr. Mackenzie with a water pistol when I started this podcast, I must be brutally honest with you, but don't let it be said I don't come prepared. Okay, final question, and this might be one that you might have to think about, because you've kind of shown an introspectiveness there that I think most people would have guessed, but like the fact that you're kind of there, like as far as the position, but you're still looking at it as if, well, yeah, but I'm not there where I want to be yet. I'm still trying to be the analyst I want to be. I still want to be the producer and the executive producer and the host and the writer that I want to be. And that's fascinating because, like you've said, people want to be where you are right now. And you're already looking at like, well, yeah, I am where I am and it's great. But I want to be there. So I guess the question is, what are your ultimate aspirations personally within the sphere right now, and what are your ultimate aspirations outside of it or beyond it now that you've had a very diverse career up until this point. So, like, you could do anything you put your mind to. So, like, what tantalizes? What really intrigues you?
It's funny because I don't really think of myself as being an ambitious person. I see myself as being someone who wants to do a good job at what they do, and I've been lucky enough to be able to pursue a career in an industry which is fun to be a part of. And so, I guess for me, I just consider myself incredibly lucky to be able to do a job that I enjoy doing, and it also happens to be a job which is, you know, well sought after. And I think you only get there by working hard. And I don't want to come across as saying, you know, in 5 years' time I want to be here, in 10 years' time I want to be here. I don't think about my life in that way. I simply think of my life as being like, I've got to make money to live, and I would like to do that in a way that I think I'm doing a good job, but also I find enjoyable. I don't want to just, you know, I just don't feel as I'm facing the drudge every day. So yeah, I mean, the big question, I suppose, in this respect is, would you ever go into club work? It's funny because like part of me really loves being in the media, because I love the opportunity to focus on lots of things, right? So I said before, that's an incredible, it's an incredible struggle to constantly keep up across all of the football clubs. And there's a sense in which if I were to work in a club, the scope of my knowledge would reduce vastly. It would still be hard work, but I wouldn't have to keep eyes everywhere. But I love that. I love the opportunity of being able to talk about a lot of stuff. And I think I would feel as though I was being narrowed if I had to just work, if I worked for a club, because then I would just be like, okay, this is what your job becomes. And I think it very quickly would become boring in a certain way. But at the same time, there's a lot of people out there who say, oh, you know, if you're only good at your job, you'd be working for a club. And so part of me kind of wants to do that, so I can just be like, yeah, well, I did work for a club, and I've done stuff for clubs, like, indirectly. So it's not something I take incredibly seriously, but yeah, I would like the opportunity, I think, to go into a club in order to be able to start putting the ideas that I talk about into practice. And I think that would be an incredibly innovating experience to be able to actually be involved in the practical aspects as well.
Well, there you go. I mean, I could literally talk to you. There's a lot in your responses I had to let go for the sake of time, and that again speaks to why I wanted to talk to you, because you are without a doubt one of the most I don't want to hear a word out of you while I say this. One of the most insightful, one of the most thoughtful, one of the most introspective analysts I've ever seen. And watching you on TIFO, almost an extension of what I see JJ do sometimes, which is I see JJ arguing with himself internally, and only half of the monologue actually makes it out of his mouth, where he's arguing his own points. You do that in real time, and in real time, like, I've never seen someone be so considerate of most of the argument, as much as you can possibly put forward. And I know that that's hard because you've got time constraints and you've got to hold people's attention. But I still respect the fact that you take the time and you really consider things, and you try to, even when you've given an answer like that, I always love how you go, so look, basically, and then you give that answer. But you've shown your work in, you've shown your homework, and you've shown, like, how hard it is, and without really doing it at the audience's cost. I think the audience gets a lot out of what you say and do and how you present yourself, and I am incredibly excited to see how that develops, because you've only really scratched the surface, man. You're just getting going, and that's really exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm excited about the next season in particular, because I feel, like I said before, I've got my feet under the desk now. I can start doing positive things rather than just sort of flying by the seat of my pants, which is what I felt I was doing before.
A few moments later.
Where can people find you, and where can people support you? TIFO, and is there anything in particular you want people to be aware of coming up that you're particularly excited for, that you want, like, you know, I don't care what happens, you better tune in?
Yeah, so obviously the best place you guys can go to sort of help TIFO out is YouTube. Also other social media platforms as well, so TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. the other ones, you guys know where they're at. But yeah, go watch our content. It makes a big difference to what we can achieve if lots of people watch our content. In terms of my own stuff, I have a Twitter account at Jon_Mackenzie, where I throw various nonsense up from time to time. If you don't have any interest in out of possession football, probably don't follow me. Probably not for you. But yeah, and again, the best way you guys can support us is by engaging with us and taking on board what we're saying, pushing back when you think that we're wrong, and sharing with your friends when you think we're onto something. So we wouldn't be where we are without the people who watch our videos. So thanks to the people who are listening to this who do watch our videos, because we're incredibly grateful for it.
All hail the Goblin King. Thank you very much, Mr. Mackenzie, for taking the time. And I'm a huge fan of what you've done so far, and I'm wishing you every success. And just as a side note, editor's note to myself, there's a tweet from someone who is lamenting the end of the original show, but then gave a very, I thought, poignant breakdown of why the change is ultimately going to be best. And I'm going to put that there because I really want people to buy in. I really want people to give it a shot and look at it for its own merits rather than just complaining that Joe's not coming in with a banjo every 5 minutes. So listen, man, all the success in the world, and just I'm gonna have to find an excuse to get you back on down. There's so much you said there that I just want to pick apart a little bit more, but time is against us. So thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
No, and I really appreciate you having me on as well. It's you're a really good interviewer, and part of me feels quite self-indulgent because I've been talking about myself, and there's an extent to which that's
well,
not that important.
Ain't going to talk about me. I'm just sitting here doing my thing, man. It was really kind of you to come on, and best of all, you guys didn't hear this. I made him say the thing where he said, "That's a really good question." Every once a show, I try and get it. So listen, man, that was a lot of fun as well. I really appreciate that, man.
Yeah, and look, as I was saying before about the podcast for TIFO, the thing that I love about the new format is that long form conversations are what really got me into podcasting in the first place. The time and space to be able to just thrash ideas out without having to be super slick, without having to have all the answers, and to be able to spiral around a topic until we actually get to the center of it and feel as though we've got somewhere. So the opportunity to be able to do this is great. I love talking, and I've loved hearing from you as well and your takes on things as well. So thanks very much for having me on.